38 days. That's how long a gang of pirates held the most dangerous man in history and laughed in his face the entire time. They laughed when he told them their ransom demand was insultingly low. They laughed when he ordered them, armed men who did this for a living, to keep the noise down so he could sleep. And they laughed hardest at the joke he kept repeating around the fire. Always with a smile, when I'm free, I'm going to come back and crucify every single one of you. Hilarious. Weeks after they released him, those same men were nailed to crosses above the harbor where they'd been celebrating, hunted down by a private fleet that legally shouldn't exist, led by a 25-year-old with no office, no army, no permission. But that's not the story. That's the warm-up. Because the man who crucified his own kidnappers would one day be brought down, 23 wounds, by a man he had personally forgiven. And even that wasn't the end. The most brutal revenge in this story was carried out by a man already in his grave. This is the story of Julius Caesar and of every single person who ever made the mistake of thinking they'd beaten him. Winter, 75 BC. The Aegean, a young Roman aristocrat, is sailing east to Rhodes to study public speaking, mid-20s, already trailing powerful enemies back home. Near the small island of Pharmacusa, his ship sails straight into an ambush. Cilician pirates, and these were not desperate men in a rowboat. This was an empire of the sea, hundreds of ships, fortified harbors, fleets that sacked towns while Rome looked the other way. Ransoming rich travelers was their business model, and business was excellent. Standard procedure: assess the hostage, name a price. They looked at their catch, expensive clothes, soft hands, and demanded 20 talents of silver, half a ton of it. A crew could retire on that, and the hostage laughed at them. Not nervous laughter. He was offended. They clearly had no idea who they'd captured. 20 talents was an insult. A man like him was worth at least 50. They demanded 20. He volunteered 50. A prisoner, alone in a pirate camp, negotiated his own ransom up out of pure ego. The pirates figured they'd caught the strangest, richest idiot on the sea and agreed on the spot. Caesar sent his companions off to raise the money, kept a doctor and 2 servants, and settled in to wait. And here's the question that hangs over this whole story. Was this man fearless? Or was something wrong with him? Hold that question. The answer is coming, and it's not what you expect. For the next 38 days, something happened on that island neither side ever forgot. The pirates thought they were holding a prisoner. Caesar decided he was on a retreat, and they were his staff. When their drinking kept him up at night, he didn't ask for quiet. He sent a servant to order them to shut up. And here's the unbelievable part. They did. Men who'd sunk ships and sold prisoners into slavery went quiet, tiptoeing around a hostage's bedtime. He joined their games on the beach, like the camp was his personal gym. He spent his days writing poems and speeches, then gathered his kidnappers around and performed, recited verses to an audience of sea raiders. And when they didn't applaud with enough enthusiasm, he called them illiterate barbarians. To their faces. Then, every time, same relaxed voice, same smile, the same punchline, and when I'm free, I'm going to crucify all of you. They roared every single time, the scrawny Roman with his poems and his cheerful threats. It became the camp's running joke. Here's what should have terrified them. In 38 days, the word never varied. Not punish, not repay, always crucify. And crucifixion wasn't just a death sentence, it was the death sentence. Slow, public, reserved for slaves and pirates because it was maximum humiliation. He had already chosen the method. He wasn't venting, he was giving them the schedule. Now, before you decide Caesar was carved from marble, here's what actually scared him. Not pirates, not death. His hairline. Caesar was going bald, and it tormented him. Suetonius says he combed his thin hair forward, and that of every honor Rome ever piled on him, the one he cherished most was the right to wear a laurel wreath at all times, which Roman gossips insisted was mostly about the bald spot. The man cracking crucifixion jokes to his own kidnappers couldn't handle a receding hairline. Keep that in mind. It comes back. Day 38. The ransom arrived, 50 talents on the beach, and credit where it's due, the pirates honored the deal. They let him walk and watched the funny Romans sail away while they split a legendary payday. Free. Story over, right? Except freedom wasn't what Caesar wanted. He wanted them. Caesar landed at Miletus. Take stock of what he was in that moment, a private citizen. No office. No command, no legal authority to arrest so much as a fish. He raised a fleet anyway. No senate, no legion, no permission. One man, one grudge, and within days, a naval squadron raised on the strength of his name and the unnerving certainty of a man who had made a promise. A kidnapping victim doing the one thing hostages never do, turning around. Now run the numbers the way the pirates would have. The Mediterranean held 10,000 coves and hidden anchorages, and every raider on it knew the first rule of the ransom trade: the moment the hostage sails free, you vanish. Finding one crew again should have taken years. It took Caesar days. Because here's the detail that should unsettle you: he didn't have to hunt at all. He sailed straight back to the island. And they were still there. The same anchorage, the same beach, still celebrating, still drunk, still spending his 50 talents, 38 days of studying him up close, and they'd learned nothing. They were so sure the joke was a joke that they hadn't even bothered to move. The fight barely deserves the word. Caesar's ships fell on the anchorage, seized the vessels, took the crews prisoner, and took back the treasure. Every coin recovered. Then he shipped his kidnappers to prison in Pergamon and rode to the Roman governor to request their execution. And the governor said, "Let me think about it." Because the pirates were worth money, sold as slaves, they'd fetch a fortune, and the governor was eyeing that ransom too, he told Caesar he'd consider the matter at his leisure. At his leisure, while the men who caged Caesar sat alive in a cell. So Caesar left mid-sentence, rode back to Pergamon, and handled it himself. No trial. No sentence, no authority. Again, a private citizen walked into a Roman prison and gave the order, and such was the force coming off this man that people simply obeyed. The crosses went up by the sea. Every pirate who had laughed around that fire learned the punchline had always had a date on it. And right now, you're expecting a monster. This is where it turns into a horror film, right? The vengeful Romans savoring every scream. That is not what happened. Before a single man went up on a cross, Caesar gave one final order: cut their throats first. All of them. A quick end by the blade, then the cross. The world would see the crosses. Only the dying knew the mercy. He kept his word to the letter, every man crucified, exactly as promised. But he was not what they thought he was. This wasn't cruelty. It was precision. And that eerie, surgical precision runs through his entire life like a scar. The pirates weren't a young man's one-time fury. They were a rehearsal. Because 23 years later, an entire nation was about to make the pirates' mistake and meet the finished version. 52 BC. A hilltop fortress in central Gaul called Alesia. A king named Vercingetorix had done the impossible, united the feuding tribes of Gaul, and risen against Caesar's conquest. It ended here, his army starving inside a besieged fortress, while Caesar's outnumbered legions, trapped between the walls and a massive relief army, somehow beat both at once. When it was over, Vercingetorix rode out of the gates alone, in his finest armor. He circled Caesar once on horseback, dismounted, stripped off his armor, threw his weapons down at Caesar's feet, and sat on the ground in silence. A king, waiting to find out what his conqueror's mercy looked like. Now, everyone watching knew a beaten king had exactly two possible futures: the sword or the famous mercy Rome sometimes granted a worthy enemy. Caesar chose a third option nobody there had imagined. He kept him. 6 years in the Tullianum, a lightless stone pit in the heart of Rome, Vercingetorix waited underground while Caesar finished his wars. When Caesar finally celebrated his triumph in 46 BC, the king was hauled into the daylight and paraded in chains through Rome as a living trophy. When the parade was over, when the crowds had had their look, then he was executed. Do the math. The pirates got 38 days. Vercingetorix got 6 years. That's not rage. Rage burns out. That's patience. Revenge filed away and scheduled for the most useful possible day. And the pattern repeats everywhere you look. At Uxellodunum, the last Gallic town to defy him, Caesar spared every defender's life, then cut off their hands, so every survivor lived on as a walking warning. When the Senate itself cornered him, give up your army or be branded an enemy of the state. Caesar marched a legion across a shallow river called the Rubicon, choosing civil war over losing an argument. Nobody beat this man and enjoyed it afterward. Nobody, which makes his own soldiers so fascinating. At that same triumph, the summit of his entire life, his veterans marched behind his chariot, singing filthy songs about him, roasting his love affairs, warning the men of Rome, in verse, to lock up their wives, because the bald adulterer was back in town, to his face, in front of the entire city, and he let them. Here's why that matters. Caesar's revenge was never about insults. The pirates didn't pay for laughing at his poetry. They paid for putting him in a cage. Words cost nothing. Actions carried a price list, and everyone who understood that rule survived him. Now let me show you a scene about the men who didn't. Years earlier, during a tense Senate debate, treason in the air, someone slipped Caesar a note. His bitterest rival, Cato, the self-appointed guardian of Roman virtue, spotted the handoff and pounced. Secret messages? In this chamber? He demanded the note be read aloud. Caesar calmly handed it over. It was a love letter. To Caesar, from Servilia, Cato's own half-sister. Cato hurled it back at him in disgust, while the chamber tried not to laugh. Caesar just smiled, that same smile from the pirate beach. Funny story. Now hold on to the name Servilia. Because Servilia had a son, a serious, bookish, principled young man named Brutus, and the most methodical avenger who ever lived is about to make exactly one exception to his own rules, for that woman's son. One exception. It will cost him more than every enemy he ever faced combined. But first, that question from the beginning, fearless or something wrong with him? Here's the honest answer. The ancient sources say Caesar had the falling sickness, sudden seizures that could strike anywhere. On campaign, in public, mid-crisis. For centuries, everyone said epilepsy. Modern historians aren't so sure. Some argue it sounds more like a series of small strokes. The truth is, we don't know. Anyone who tells you otherwise is guessing. Here's why it matters. Caesar was not invincible, and nobody knew it better than he did. He lived every day knowing his body could drop him without warning, in front of anyone. And maybe that's the real answer from the pirate beach. A man whose own body might betray him tomorrow doesn't fear pirates, or kings, or senates, or storms. He fears exactly one thing: running out of time. And in March of 44 BC, he did. By 44 BC, Caesar had won everything. The civil war was over. His rivals were gone or pardoned. The Senate had named him dictator for life. And that word, pardoned, is where this whole story turns. Because history's most methodical avenger had picked up a strange late-career habit, forgiving people. It became so famous it had a name, the clemency of Caesar. Men who took up arms against him in the Civil War weren't executed. They were spared, promoted, invited to dinner. Cassius, pardoned, and Brutus, Servilia's son, who had also picked the wrong side, not just pardoned. Caesar ordered that Brutus was not to be harmed in battle. Afterward, he promoted him, favored him, treated him almost like a son. Feel the shape of that. The man who crucified pirates over a month of captivity handed his armed enemies their lives back, free of charge. Remember the rule? Words free, actions priced? At the peak of his power, Caesar stopped charging. March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. The Senate met that day in a hall attached to the Theater of Pompey, a monument built by the great rival Caesar had crushed. More than 60 senators were in on the plot, daggers under togas. They crowded around him with petitions, closer, closer, until someone yanked his toga from his neck, and the first blade came from behind. Then all of them at once. It was so frenzied that the plotters wounded each other in the crush, 23 wounds. And the sources say that when Caesar saw Brutus, Servilia's son, the man he had protected on the battlefield, step forward with a dagger, he stopped fighting back. He pulled his toga up over his face and fell. He collapsed at the base of a statue of Pompey. The rival he'd destroyed stood over him in marble while he bled out on the floor. History does not usually write poetry this on the nose. That day, it did. The assassins burst out into the streets waving their daggers, shouting that the tyrant was dead, that Rome was free, that the Republic was saved. They thought they'd won. They had just made the worst mistake in Roman history. They had started a revenge story against an avenger who didn't need to be alive. Because Caesar had one more move, and he made it from inside a coffin. Days later, his will was read to the public. It was a weapon disguised as paperwork. To every ordinary citizen of Rome, every single one, Caesar left a cash gift from his own fortune. Months of a laborer's wages just handed over. His private gardens along the Tiber, an estate no common Roman could dream of entering, he gave to the public. Forever, a dead man reached out of the grave and handed the entire city a reason to adore him and to despise the men who took him from them. At the funeral, when the crowd heard the will and saw the torn, blood-stained toga held up, every dagger hole visible, grief went volcanic. The mob ripped the form apart for firewood and cremated Caesar right there, in the sacred heart of the city. Then they grabbed torches and went hunting. Assassins' houses attacked. Conspirators barricaded inside their homes. In the chaos, the crowd descended on an innocent poet in the street because he shared a name with one of the plotters. Wrong man. Didn't matter. The liberators had freed Rome, and Rome tried to burn them alive for it. Within weeks, the men who brought the daggers had fled the city they claimed to have saved, so the first revenge for the Ides wasn't taken by a general or an heir. It was taken by the common people of Rome, weaponized by a dead man's generosity. Then, Rome read the part, naming his heir. Not Mark Antony, the loyal general everyone expected. Instead, a name most of the city had never heard, a sickly 18-year-old great-nephew studying overseas, Gaius Octavius. The assassins heard teenager and exhaled. They thought that about the wrong family. The teenager crossed the sea, walked into Rome, and took the dead man's name as his own. Caesar, old veterans, heard that name and came out of retirement for it. Within 18 months, this harmless boy Octavian had a private army, a pact with Antony, and a new law, the Lex Pedia, condemning every one of Caesar's assassins, not just the ringleaders, every man who had raised or blessed a blade. Then came the prescriptions, lists of names posted in the forum. Anyone on a list could be hunted down by anyone for a reward, and near the top of that list, Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, never stabbed Caesar. But he'd applauded the men who did, then spent months publishing the most vicious attack speeches ever written against Antony. Soldiers caught his litter on a country road. They took his head. And then, on specific instructions, they took his hands, the hands that wrote the speeches. The head and hands were carried back to Rome and nailed to the rostra, the speaker's platform in the middle of the forum, the exact stage where Cicero had delivered the greatest orations in Roman history. The ancient writers add one more detail. If you can stomach it, Antony's wife reportedly pulled out the tongue and pierced it through with her hairpins. The most brilliant voice of the age answered like that. Words, it turned out, weren't free anymore. That rule died with Caesar. Then Octavian and Antony sailed east to finish it. At Philippi, in 42 BC, barely 2.5 years after the Ides, the armies met. Cassius, wrongly convinced the battle was lost, had a servant end it with the same dagger. One ancient source claims that he had driven into Caesar. Brutus lost the rematch weeks later and ran himself onto his own sword. Within 3 years of the Ides, virtually every man who put a blade into Caesar was gone. Battle, their own blades. Execution, shipwreck. The ancient historians recorded it with a shudder. Not one died a natural death, and more than a few died by the very daggers they'd used on him. The pirates needed 38 days to learn the lesson. The assassins needed 3 years. Same lesson. There is no version of this story where you beat him. So tally it up. What did they actually win? They cut Caesar down to stop a king and save the Republic. Final score, the Republic they drew daggers for? The civil wars they triggered destroyed it, permanently, the one-man rule they feared? Their own daggers handed absolute power to Octavian, who ruled for over 40 years as Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The exact future they turned on their friend to prevent, they personally built, then died watching it rise. And Caesar himself? Rome declared him a god. A temple rose in the forum, on the very spot where the mob burned his body. When a comet blazed over his funeral games, the city decided it was his soul ascending and stamped it on coins. His family name became the job title of emperors for 2,000 years. Kaiser, Tsar, men were still ruling under his name in the 20th century. The pirates laughed at him and got crosses. The Senate drew daggers and got an emperor. Every single person who ever thought they'd beaten Julius Caesar ended up, one way or another, building his monument. Because that's the truth about history's most brutal revenge. It wasn't the crucifixions, it wasn't Philippi, or the hands nailed to the rostra. It's that this man won arguments from inside the grave, and he still hasn't stopped. You just spent 20 minutes of your life on a 2,000-year-old grudge. They thought they won. He's the one you know by name. If this story got its hooks into you, subscribe, because history is packed with people who were certain they'd won, right up until they found out who they were dealing with. I'll see you in the next one.